Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Enablement Uncanned. We're back again, and we're back here with Natasha Lindsay out of Jabra. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you today?
Yeah, can't complain. I know we've been speaking, could complain, won't complain.
Yes.
You know how it is. So yeah, thanks for joining. It's great to have you on. And Natasha's one of our long-standing customers out of Jabra, and she is the Director of Sales Enablement and Channel Development, I think. Is that right? Before I'm getting it wrong?
Yes, that's right.
Absolutely. Give us a little intro about yourself.
Sure. So, my name is Natasha Lindsay. As Jack has said, the Director of Sales Enablement and Channel Development here at Jabra. I've actually been at the company for quite a long time now, so over 10 years. And it's been really a fantastic place to grow and develop. Maybe most interestingly, I actually didn't start my career like lots of people in enablement. I actually was a salesperson. So a lot of my enablement experiences come from those real life scenarios of the frustrations of a seller, right? I could probably write that as a book maybe at some point in the future.
Multiple books.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that element of my career which I think has been really interesting, and it's been super helpful now that I'm in enablement as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. I've always thought about that from me as a salesperson. Could I get into enablement? And it just goes to show that that's possible, right?
It is, yeah.
Don't necessarily need the enablement qualification. And we've actually got a topic of that coming up on another session. So you'll like that one. But today we're going to be talking about the future of work, AI, sales skills, and sort of how that all relates to enablement. And yeah, let's kick this off. So we know that AI is transforming the way we sell. We know that. But it is creating a lot of uncertainty. And we're all talking about that. So what's your boldest uncanned take on how AI is going to sort of impact sales skill and enablement?
Okay, so maybe if we start with the fact that AI is definitely a crucial element in transforming the
Huge.
seller and the buyer experience, because at the end, that's what we in enablement want to do, right? We want to transform that buyer experience. We know that it can be key in unlocking the seller productivity, which we'll talk about a bit later on, and also to help organizations look at the revenue growth levers as well. Maybe my biggest reflection is that organizations really need to customize AI. I'm not convinced there's a one size fits all model, but I think you can really learn about your organization's use cases and how to then apply them to optimize the ways of working and also to just benefit the sellers and also your customers.
That's such a great point. One size fits all, right? Because the amount of people that you speak to, I mean, I speak to on a daily basis. Oh, we don't want to do that. We do want to do this. This works for me. That doesn't for me. So it's naturally going to be, you can't blanket it for everyone. You can't blanket AI for everybody. And there's so many different elements to it, particularly in the study that you've been looking at, right? So the future of jobs report, because that's sort of bringing
Yes.
in quite a lot of different pieces of this in terms of how AI is beginning to change and sort of what new skills. I know we've been talking about this, millennials, Gen Z, boomers, all these different sort of age gaps. You know, what new skills a sales team going to need in an AI driven workforce? So maybe we'll go into that report, because I think listeners are gonna want to sort of understand a little bit more about that, for sure.
Yeah, and we can definitely share the link with them afterwards and
Yeah,
talk
that's a
about
good
some of
point.
the different things in there as well. Why I actually found this report so interesting. So it's actually from the World Economic Forum, and
Hmm.
you're right, it is actually the future of jobs. Um, One of the things for me that was really critical in that is that they have a section about the skills that are on the rise and even looking at retraining and how it's related to AI as well. And if you think about, often we assume the skills in work, what do people really need to be successful? We're now seeing that there's this big trend towards AI and big data, technological literacy, or like another way to use that might be digital dexterity, right?
Hmm.
Creative thinking, resilience, flexibility, agility, analytical thinking. These are all, I mean, all of these skills are needed now to be successful in work, right? I think about even my own job, and how I would apply all of those different sort of thinkings and different skills that I would actually then need. And some of these aren't even trainable. That's the other part, right? Some of them are. That's also maybe another bit that's quite interesting, right? And we might talk a bit more about that later when we talk about the use cases for AI, right? Because I think that applies to lots of these.
Because AI and big data is right at the top of that skills on the rise,
Yes.
isn't it? And I know creative thinking is top
Mm-hmm.
4, top 5. So I mean, we're talking like a net increase here. The AI and big data being the biggest net
Mm-hmm.
increase going into sort of the next 5 to 10 years. So yeah, I mean, how? Let's talk a little bit about sort of how AI powered insights are reshaping coaching, development, and sort of how it's transforming in those several ways, because we got those
Mm-hmm.
different, we got the impact, we got tech as a teammate, the rev tech maturity model, all those
Yes.
things that the report kind of goes into. Do you want to
Mm-hmm.
sort of take us into a few of those?
Okay. So for me, I think I'll make the starting comment and point
Yeah,
that AI will not replace the coaching of a sales manager or a coach. That's that for me, that's never going to be replaced. Having someone in a meeting there who can guide and take you through the session, whether that's
agreed.
face to face or virtually, I don't think it can do that. But I do think there are use cases in terms of how we use AI for coaching and development, right? So I
Hmm.
think first of all, the places where I can see AI being really beneficial is actually that seller impact. So helping sellers to understand buyer behaviors, potentially to coach them through scenarios. What I'm thinking about here is role play type scenarios,
Yeah,
right? Thinking about maybe how would I answer a question if the buyer says they don't have budget, as an example, or they throw something into the conversation I'm not expecting. How do I reply and I'm responsive, right? For me, that's a really good way or use case, because outside of that, then your seller is actually practicing with their customers.
mm,
That's the reality, right? That the sellers are not necessarily practicing, they're practicing with customers.
which is
And if we
live,
could,
which
yeah,
could be the
exactly.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So being able to help maximize that seller's impact and giving them these tools to do things like role play and coaching, I think is super interesting. There's then this element of actually not seeing tech as a threat, but more as a teammate. And I think Gartner talks a lot about this as well, actually, right? Tech as a teammate. And we really see people becoming overwhelmed by the volume of tools that they have and also then the use cases for them. So I think it's
Hmm.
that simplicity of helping the seller focus on what matters most and what is going to
Hmm.
solve the biggest challenges that they have, or what are the biggest blockers to their sales execution, right? That would be a really nice way to think about it. Um, then in terms of like RevTech and where RevTech is, every day I go into LinkedIn, there is a new technology being advertised, something new in my mailbox, right? So it's always trying to stay ahead of what is in the market. I think it's interesting to start to look at things like these simple elements of automation that we can do. Maybe it's automating sales stages in your CRM, one
Hmm.
example, to more AI assisted selling. So, next best actions, or maybe content or things to engage with a seller or buyer, excuse me. And then into autonomous selling with things like agents, as an example. That's maybe further in the future. And I think that still relates more to that system one and system two thinking, and what we've talked a bit about, like people buy from people. I know people get really frustrated when they talk to these agents or bots online. I know I do, right? I'm normally like,
I hate it. Yeah, I
talk
hate it.
to an agent,
Yeah.
right?
I literally
So
typed that into the web chat, put me
yeah.
through to a human.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
So it's very
yeah.
so that's also the same for our buyers as well, actually, right?
Hmm.
That's the same. We are buyers effectively in that sense. And then maybe the other part of it is thinking about the responsibility of a seller, right? That's that last piece and the sort of trends or where we think about it. Um, where can we start to then use AI to build that bridge between the tech and the human, right? So,
Hmm.
or the person, right? For me, I think about, based on my own sales experience right now, I think about AI helping me to do discovery before I go and meet a new customer. I think about it helping me to scour annual reports so that I can do
Hmm.
great account plans for the year coming, help me prospect better, write intro emails, summarize long email chains. I'm thinking about all of these things where it basically makes me even better and sharper,
Yeah, 100%.
right? So,
The mundane tasks, isn't it? I mean, it's I guess the way of putting it. And it goes back to what you were just saying, not one size will not fit all. You've got to find the right level of Gen AI that's going to make your life easier. And what works for me isn't going to necessarily work for you, Natasha, and then other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
Yeah.
really important that you raise that, because I mean, I use it all the time. I used it in preparation for this podcast, as you know. Right? You send me a brief of what you want to talk about. I use AI to kind of fluff that up, and here we are.
Yes.
And it's just not that that's mundane, but you get the point, right? It just
Mm-hmm.
kind of helps you focus on those different elements. And yeah, I mean, that piece you're talking about there of balancing the AI-driven efficiency with human trust. We've spoken a lot about trust on some previous
Mm-hmm.
sessions, but getting that right blend is going to be the most important thing. And let's go into, you mentioned their system one and system two, and I know we kind of wanted to
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. Sellers need more time for relationships, trust building, high impact conversations, which leads us to the system one, system two idea of thinking. So I was at the NEC in Birmingham. I think it was the NEC, not the NSC, in Birmingham back in November, and I was listening to a talk on the system one, system two thinking. I know you've got a lot to say about this,
Mm-hmm.
but to kind of kick this off, and we know that system one is based on impulse, based on emotional decision making, and system two is the more logical processing of data or whatever it might be. But the majority of the purchasing decision, if not all of the purchasing decision as a buyer, comes from that system one impulsivity. So are we thinking impulsivity? Not even sure if that's a word, Natasha, but
Impulsiveness,
I
maybe. I
like
think
it.
impulsiveness, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Uh-huh.
creating new words today. So, um, so what we've got to think about is if we use Gen AI to kind of help us with that system two level of thinking, can we then build more time into building those relationships and building that system one type of thinking?
For me, I would hope yes,
You'd like
because
to think that?
I would like to think that. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of change for people though to one, trust AI to do that job for them. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a big part of it. And then there's also the training and learning how AI can help them do that. Because for me, the sales piece, you buy from people, you buy from someone that you trust, someone who's
Mm-hmm.
credible, someone who does what they say they are going to do, right? You don't buy from someone because they draft a great email. You don't buy from someone generally because they've sent you a 20-page proposal, or you might even buy from a company that's more expensive if you trust the
Mm-hmm.
person and you believe they are credible and they have proposed the right solution for you. Right, it's
Yeah,
back to what we
exactly.
talked a bit about, like even the emotional element of it, right? And you do that by learning about someone. You learn about what is their pain and what are they trying to deliver for their
Yeah.
organization, what are they being measured on. And I think that's where, for me, that system two and system one is really interesting, because actually, if I can spend more time really engaging with a prospect or a customer, understanding them and what their needs are, and I can spend less time on, the reviewing annual reports or building, a discovery list of companies that I want to go after, or a prospecting list of companies, or crafting an email reply, then surely that's much better use of my time as a person and an employee, right? And I also think that will come with time as people start to trust AI more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me is like the where we are right now is the maturity is growing in AI. I think there's a lot of talk about AI, and I think most organizations are still learning about how to use it and how to apply
Mm-hmm.
it, right? So I don't think that anyone is behind. I think that everyone's maturity level is just, we're all learning, right? At the end.
All the
So,
time.
mhm,
Do you think people are going to be left behind if they don't do it quick enough? Because I've been speaking with a lot of companies like yourself, as you know, and
mhm,
some other I was on the phone with somebody yesterday that was saying they're actually blocking the use of AI in their business currently because people are bringing in AI councils and things like that,
mhm,
which I get because people are security conscious and people are
mhm.
nervous, and I do understand that. But at the same time, in 6 months' time, this is going to look very, very different again. Are people going to be left behind if they don't start utilizing this, do we think?
I think yes. But I also think there is the careful narrative to make sure that you do the right thing for your organization and you have a
Mm.
really focused deployment and change management plan. Because being realistic, the easiest thing to do is turn it on.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the easiest thing, is basically like turning the light switch. That's the easy part. But the
Mm.
governance, the security, the how to use the use cases for the organization, the continuous adoption, that is the hard part. So
Mm.
actually, my preference is not to build the plane and fly. My preference is probably to plan, really think about the use cases of deployment and make sure the proper training is in place, it's been tested, we have governance, we understand how data is being shared across it, all of these different things. I mean, employees are going to try it regardless of whether an organization allows it or not, right? Let's face it. So there is an element for organizations to really just think about these simple use cases initially to help them get started so that they are at least showing some momentum
Hmm.
as well. I think that would be my reflection on that.
So the adoption piece again is
Mm-hmm,
so important because not this podcast is designed to be vendor agnostic. However,
mm-hmm.
I'm not going to big us up in any way
No,
here.
no.
But the way I do things and the way I would use it is for sure to you know enhance the day-to-day processes and
Mm-hmm,
enhance these little things. But I'm a millennial, um, and millennials tend to like it and tend to
mm-hmm,
use it, and ChatGPT is their best friend.
mm-hmm,
But I've had conversations with a lot of customers that kind of have an opinion that maybe the older, more tenured salespeople
mm-hmm.
are really struggling with the likes of adopting AI. Now, do we think that there's a difference between the age gaps here? Do we think that's an opinion? Because I know you've got there's something in the report about this, or you've got some opinion on that. So
Mm-hmm.
it'd be great to hear your thoughts on the sort of differences there as well.
So from my experience, I actually don't see age being a barrier to usage of AI.
Mm. Which is the opposite of what we hear, right?
I think
Or at
people
least
are
I hear
super,
anyway.
yeah,
Yeah.
but people are super excited to learn about it. I
Mm.
think for me, sometimes it's in the explanation of how AI can be used. And in this example, like Gen AI, right? Because people hear AI, and if I talk about like Jabra as an organization, we make products with AI in them, right? But
Yeah,
it's
you
not
do.
Gen AI, it's a product that is, AI is doing the noise cancellation as an example, or
Yeah.
there's AI in our video technology. So, I mean, I think that's the problem as well. When people hear AI, it can sometimes be like, you open the kind of this massive can of worms that they maybe don't fully understand. But once they start
Mhm.
to see the use cases, people generally are like really open across our organization. I can see all sorts of different people, actually deploying, using, and adopting it. So I think that's the opposite in terms of the opinions that I've seen and heard.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Is it just opinions? Because I mean,
I think so.
yeah, I think it might be. Because I speak to these people, I speak to marketers, salespeople all the time, or
Hmm.
sales enablement leaders all the time, and a lot of them are saying, "Oh, they won't want to do that. They
Hmm.
won't want to use this AI. They won't want that to help them." But again, if you're actually seeing people adopting it from a top level and from these different age gaps, then
Hmm.
it's superb. And like you mentioned, AI, it's been there a lot longer than people think,
Yes.
right?
And I think though the World Economic Forum again in that report, they talk a lot about like upskilling. So I wonder
Mm,
sometimes if the resistance is also because organizations aren't enabling people to upskill properly,
mm,
right? You can't expect everyone to go and be able to drive, the car on day one. So what are these different steps that you take? So how do you educate your organization first on what is AI? What does it actually mean? Then, how to prompt as an example. Do people understand the basics in prompting and how to use Gen AI?
mhm.
Because I think it's almost kind of building a change management plan around those different elements rather than rushing in to say we're deploying 10 use cases and that's like, let's go, turn it on. And we expect everyone to be at the same place at the same time, right? Because they're never going to be. So
Hmm.
I think there's some reflection on maybe the process and how they deploy technology, perhaps, right? That could be interesting.
So you use a bit of AI, and
Hmm.
obviously we know what you use. So
Hmm.
how have you then built building seller competencies in prompt
Mm-hmm.
engineering. Like you were talking about the prompting.
Mm-hmm.
I know you'll talk about Genie AI, which is the
Mm-hmm.
Bigtincan version of that. But how have you gone about doing that? Listeners would probably want to hear that, I imagine.
Yeah, okay. So basically we started to look at some of the different areas where we had challenges or gaps.
Mm-hmm.
So we understood like what were kind of causing sellers problems, pains, all these different things. And we looked at some of those across our organization. We also then looked at what tools were available from our IT, to your point, what's been approved and we can use, right? Then once we did that, we started to look for small groups of users who could help us to test the solution and test out
Okay.
the use cases. So let's call them champions or VIPs,
However
right?
you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're getting early access to the tools. They get to test them out, give us some feedback, show us how they're working, how they're being used. They also can generally tell us how they're not working, right? So for me, that's super interesting, getting the feedback on great to hear how it's working. How
Mm-hmm.
is it not working for you? Is it the prompting and language that you're not
Mm-hmm.
understanding? Is it the types or where you are using AI as an example, because we have it in many different places, right? And they don't all feed the same data. The same data doesn't feed them all. So we also then did like that education on more generally what is AI, and then also teaching people how to prompt. Because I think the prompt engineering, having a prompt library, all these types of things are actually super helpful to get people started. Because actually, if you think about it, it's kind of unnatural to to like prompt in a sense, because
Yeah, it
it's
is. Yeah.
in your head you are doing these things and you're basically then having to write instructions on how to do something you do
Mm-hmm.
naturally, right?
Without thinking.
So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So there is something that's a bit unnatural there as well, right? And then I think just constantly getting that feedback from the different teams on how it's working, what's not, sharing the different practices, and also then letting the leadership team see the benefits that that's then having. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you then create that desire. If you think about like change management and AdCar, you're building awareness and desire. And as the knowledge then starts to build, right? And you can then start to roll out more and more and more as people become more familiar with the tools as well.
So how are you seeing, I mean, how fast are you seeing an impact? Because we're rolling out, when we sell an enablement system,
Hmm.
we're including AI in that as standard now, right?
Hmm.
It's standard practice, and we're
Hmm.
seeing adoption percentage increases from the off.
Hmm.
Are you seeing that? Because I know you've got your great expect AI-tions, however you want to call it,
Yes. Uh-huh.
expectations, but with AI in the middle,
Hmm.
2024 report. And, you say employees are optimistic, but adoption is
Hmm.
still evolving. How long is it going to take to see a big impact, do you think? And is it seeing an impact? Are you seeing an impact fast?
Where we see impact is actually on the time that sellers are spending. And maybe for
Mm.
organizations actually to see the impact, and this is another favorite enablement topic, right? But it's looking at sort of the attribution of enablement, right? That sort of attribution element of it. One way you could potentially do that as an enabler is actually to look at the use cases. So one might be, if we think about Genie AI and Search AI in your platform, one of the things we might say is like, how long did a seller spend looking for document X or answer Y?
Yeah.
Okay, on average, they're looking for documents and it's taken them 20 or 30 minutes, and they're going to multiple places, whatever it might be. And then now they're able to go in and ask Genie, get a reference of the different documents, and get some information and answer the question they have. That's taken them seconds, right? So
Hmm.
for me, that's then where you can start to see the impact and effect when it starts to make people faster. But I think it's still this maturity curve of people still have to learn. They still
Hmm.
have to really um, figure out the prompting, because the prompting is key for me. Like that's where the real magic happens, when you get into sort of more the advanced prompting and all the fun stuff happens, right? So the maturity, I think, for different organizations will be different depending on how many use cases they decide to deploy as well. Like if they're doing call recording notes, or like an AI note taker, right? They're doing some sort of AI forecasting, they're doing,
Hmm.
then obviously all of these things accumulated together will have a huge impact. Um, maybe there is something on when is enough. That's maybe a thought that comes to my mind, is like, at what point is it enough?
Yeah, you're right. But it goes back to that point you said right at the start, is that everyone's different, and
Hmm.
you should just at the moment, find what's comfortable for you as an individual and as an organization.
Yeah.
I utilize the AI notes. We were scrambling to find notes
Hmm.
before the podcast. I mean, I was, right?
Yep.
Notes that I'd written down in November that I'd lost, right? Never going to look at them again. But
Hmm.
because we use AI notes now on calls like this and calls that we have, you don't, it goes back to that section one, system one and system two. You're letting AI focus on the more mundane, logical, rational
Hmm.
tasks, giving you and freeing up that time to to have that more human connection. So yeah, change management is key, like you say. Start
Hmm.
small, show quick wins, and it's really great to hear. It's really great to hear that you're building the confidence internally and actually seeing that. And I think organizations are going to see quick wins,
Hmm.
quick adoptions and bits and pieces like that. But going back to the emotional aspect you were talking about,
Hmm.
Natasha, when I was at the event, they were talking about how bringing food into a meeting
Hmm.
actually created more of a chance of that deal signing, right? And they say that you should have a meeting off site, take them away from their office, have
Hmm.
it in a neutral location so they're a bit more relaxed.
Hmm.
And I found that so interesting. AI can't do that.
No, it can't. No.
AI cannot do that. It can't bring a cake into the meeting. It
It
can't.
can send I mean, it could send a Starbucks gift card, for example, maybe, right?
It
Depending.
could. It could, right? But I wanted to make sure we touched on that because that's so interesting that you can begin to utilize AI in a way that's going to help. And even if you're saving those small percentage of times like you're talking about, the 1% here, the 2% there, by using meeting notes, by using, helping summarize an email, you can then spend that extra percent
Hmm.
on creating that emotional development with that customer. And we know that the 100% of that decision making comes from that element of the brain.
I mean, for example, one of the things I've actually was testing out with AI, and it was something I did when I was a seller as well. There's different frameworks you can use to do this, but before I would meet with a customer, I'd want to be quite prepared in terms of like what was going on in the environment, what were
Yeah.
things that might be impacting them. So some people use Pesto, but there's loads of different ways to do it. But I basically created a prompt and used it to test out, hey, I'm going to this meeting with customer X or Y. Please do an analysis based on everything you see in the news right now, based on this framework, and summarize at the bottom the 2 or 3 things that are most relevant for me to talk about when I'm in the meeting.
Amazing.
So rather than me suddenly having to now scour all of the different websites, annual reports, I've now got this and it was really fascinating. I did a company in Scotland, and obviously, like, because I live here and I know the company really well, and I thought, this is really interesting. Like, if I was going now to meet this company, there were so many places for me to then think about how could I talk to them about our company and
Hmm.
the value we could add and the things that were on their mind. And, it suddenly gave me more time to be inspired and to think creatively about like how I was going to approach that meeting rather than
Yeah.
being like, oh my goodness, I'm going to the meeting, like I'm driving in my car, I've got to get there, rushing in the door, or like doing
Yeah.
it virtually and I'm going from meeting to meeting to meeting. This was kind of like giving me this time to be a bit more inspired by the potential future conversation that I was going to have. And then what else happens then when you're more inspired? You go into a conversation, you're
Yeah.
energized, right? You're
And you're more comfortable. You're
engaged,
more comfortable. Yeah.
you then are more of an expert in the conversation. You can be seen as a credible, trusted advisor rather than like this amateur who comes to the meeting, like,
Yeah.
unprepared with no idea about what's going on with the customer or the partner you're dealing with, not really sure what's going on in the news that might be impacting them. At least if you come with some knowledge, it's taken me less than 3 minutes and I can reuse that same prompt over and over and over again
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
tweak
Yeah.
it. Right. So it's just one really simple example of it's now suddenly gave me the license to operate and really be way more engaged in the person that I'm meeting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You are right. You're spot on because you can get to know them.
Yeah.
You can get to know them in a way that AI most certainly can't get to know somebody. We don't think yet.
Not yet.
Not
Not
yet,
yet.
anyway.
And I don't think AI could send me my favorite chocolate either, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, that's,
Unless you've
yeah,
customized a
I've
prompt to
told
know
it.
exactly what that is.
Yes,
Unless you've told it,
exactly.
this is the point, right? Unless you've
Yes.
told it. But nobody knows that. If you don't tell
No,
anyone, nobody knows that. I can't go and ask ChatGPT now what your favorite chocolate is. I wish I could, but I
no,
can't.
no.
It's not it's not going to know that. And yes, the 80-20 principle, right? We know that 20% of the brain is going to create 80% of the thinking. So if we can, and I use I use the
Hmm.
Pareto law all the time, partly because I actually had one of my first job interviews with Pareto law. It's always
Wow.
stuck with
And the
my
brain.
in my brain that's kind of where it, and I see it in day-to-day life all the time.
Hmm.
And if we can increase and utilize that 20% of that system thinking and increase that even 5 points, 10 points to actually spend more time being human with,
Hmm.
with our prospects and with our customers, it's only going to enhance it. Great. I love it.
And why is
Absolutely love
that
it.
even more relevant, right? There's a full circle here. And it just when you've summarized that there, right? You have less time in front of a prospect than ever before,
Yeah, it's a good point.
right? If you think now about the buying tasks and what happens during the buying process.
Hmm.
If I think about a consumer example or my personal life, right? Because I always talk to people about like something you do in your personal life because it's quite
Yeah.
related to work anyway, right? Okay, I want a new car. It's a great example. Okay, so my lease is coming to my end, so that's a compelling event for me to make a new purchase or buy.
Hmm.
And I start to look at all the different websites to see what new cars have come out. I'm on What Car, I'm on Auto Trader, all the main
Cinch.
brand
All the big
websites,
ones.
all
Yeah.
of that, right? I'm then on YouTube watching reviews to see how the car's performing, what it looks like. Then I have to go and, meet with my other buyer to make sure I have consensus, right, in the household, right, to
Can't
buy
be doing
back
things
to,
without that.
no,
That's
no, no,
important.
no, right, to make sure I've got consensus. Need to
Yeah.
make sure the other buyer and I are aligned on what that option is, right? And I
Yeah.
know it's a funny example, but it's true, right? Am I in budget? Also another, right? All of these things, am I going to be able to get it delivered in the timeline? All of these things are kind of in my head, right? And then at that point, I'm like, okay, I've already picked the brand I'm buying. I know how much approximately I want to spend.
Yeah.
I am now in a situation where I need to find out who can get me what I want with the money that I have,
This is such a
right?
good
And that's
point.
when the seller engages basically in most
Yeah.
circumstances.
Before you even speak to the human element, which
I'm
is,
already way far down
you're
the
already
line.
way. Yeah. 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 And I think they say, I don't know if it was Gartner, it probably was Gartner,
Hmm.
the buying in B2B, that's more B2C, but in B2B,
Hmm.
95% of the buying journey has already happened before they reach out to the salesperson.
I don't think it matters what buyer journey it is. It's humans that are
No.
buying, and your
Well,
behavior is
exactly.
the same whether you're at home
Yeah.
or whether you're in the office because you're applying that scenario to, consensus. I need to get buy-in from someone else. In this example, it was my husband, but in work, it might be 4 or 5 other people, as an example, right?
Exactly.
So
So it's even longer.
it's not the process isn't actually that different, really. Maybe I'm more impulsive in my personal life, yes, right? But also that makes sense, right? But I just think it's really fascinating. Then if you only have, say, 27% of that time now to engage, how do you make it most impactful? Do you really want to spend it being, so what are your strategies for the next 12 months? When you could really be looking on their annual report and being like, hey, I checked your annual report and one of the core things I saw this year was that you're looking at digital transformation. I was really keen to learn more from you about how that's going to impact your part of the business.
Such a good way of doing it. And how long would that have taken you without AI before? That's
Per
the question, right?
customer, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you can get fast at these things, but you're still talking, I don't know, maybe an hour of research minimum
Yeah, yeah,
before
yeah.
you're going in to have a really great meeting. I mean, like you really do need to spend time on it. It's not something you
Yeah,
can just kind
exactly.
of rush into. So,
When I joined Bigtincan, and when we're talking over 3 years ago now, AI wasn't really a thing. I mean,
mm-mm,
it was in a certain aspect, but
yeah.
at what we're talking about in terms of Gen AI, and I remember sitting down with my VP of sales, and we were preparing for meetings weeks in advance.
Yes.
And that may be checking things out, like you say, looking at annual reports, finding all this information out prior to make sure we know to ask the right questions.
And
Whereas
then the
now,
meeting gets cancelled.
and then the meeting gets cancelled or they don't turn up, which happens. To all
It
good
does, and that's my
salespeople.
point, right? So,
Yeah,
but you've then spent all that time investing
yeah.
and doing all of that preparation work for something that then has now not happened, right?
One of the most
So
frustrating things as a salesperson, and it does happen, right?
it does happen. Yeah.
So it is. It's about, and it's such a, and I'm sure listeners will absolutely love this, especially that last sort of 5-10 minutes there talking about that, because if you can really enhance the time you're going to be spending with your customer in
Yes.
person, that's where the decision is going to come from primarily.
Mhm.
All right. Is there anything that you wanted to sort of touch on before we sort of wrap up here? Is there any other parts that you wanted to sort of go into,
Mm,
particularly with the report that you're doing at Jabra and sort of how things that you were doing?
I think it's maybe the last thing that I have an interest in, right? And it's more of a, again, it's a personal interest, right? And
Mm.
maybe for people to read and learn a bit more about AI. So the company I work for is Jabra, right? A lot of these views today are my own, not Jabra's ultimately. But one of the things that we have that is super interesting is this actual report on AI. And I was thinking about how you apply the learnings to a seller. And you and I talked about this, and we talked about, well, what is a seller actually paid to do? And a seller is paid to talk
They are.
ultimately, right?
Yep.
You're paid to talk and translate the needs and the requirements into money at some point, right? And if we now start to think about how AI can start to be used, in the report, we talk a lot about the usage actually of your voice, which is a seller's most powerful asset. And I really now start to think more and more about, you know, the average statistics we had is that you can basically speak 120 to 150 words per minute, maybe faster if you're Scottish, right? That's a small joke.
That's no,
Um,
it's almost 250 words a minute, isn't
yeah,
it? If you're Scottish.
possibly. Yeah, exactly. And then you can type 40 to 50 words per minute. So you're actually basically nearly 2 to 3 times faster speaking, right? And if I
Yeah.
think about then a seller and how AI can start to really help them, then maybe the voice element is actually how they will start to interact with these different tools because there's that speed and efficiency element, right? They're going to be able to speak much more quickly and tell AI or the chatbots, agents, Gen AI models what they want, right? You can articulate yourself sometimes more easily with voice. I know I can because I'm dyslexic, right? And I find it much more easy to
To actually
speak.
talk it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I also think what I talked about earlier on, it's a bit unnatural sometimes to like write down your thoughts in a way, right? Whereas it's very natural just to say, hey, I'm going to meet customer X. Can you help me to build a overview of the 5 key articles where company X has appeared in the news?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay.
But that's
That's much
so
more
much easier to
simple,
say
right?
that out than it would be to write something down succinct for them to answer or for them as a
Mhm.
whole with AI.
Yeah. And I
Uh,
think there's this element of like disruption free, right? So
yeah,
when you type, you then get a chat message pops up, your phone goes, something else interrupts your kind of
yeah.
flow of thought. Whereas when you're speaking, there is a flow to how you speak, right? And I think that then starts to become more obvious in AI as you start to build the prompts. And there's something super nice about it, right? Today, my whole conversation's been hands free, right? So I can
Mm.
basically still completely engage with my headset in this example and um, yeah, easily access any of my prompts if I want or my Copilot or other AI tools I'm using. So I
And
think
all
it's
that's
not going
come
to,
from your research, right? From the Jabra
yeah,
research and the report. It's
yeah,
it's so interesting because I mean, even in the last week, I mean, I post on LinkedIn
hmm
quite a bit. I talked about on LinkedIn the other day about how Genie, our version of AI,
yes,
is becoming my shrink. In the best shrink
hmm
is the American term,
hmm
counselor
hmm
for us Brits. Um, I walk into the office in the morning and I have a
hmm
conversation with Jeannie, right? I talk to it. I talk to her about my
hmm
day, and it sounds does it sound sad? I don't think it's sad. Uh,
hmm
but if we're saying you can speak 3 times 3 times faster than what you can type. All of a sudden, that time savings you'll get by implementing Gen AI is then 3x what it would be if you're
It's super cool.
implementing voice.
Yeah. And
So
it's
that's a
really cool
really
if you
interesting
think about,
part.
yeah, and even from like an accessibility perspective, right? I think it makes
Mm,
the AI way more accessible as well. And I don't think it's that strange, honestly, to be sitting in the office to be speaking my prompts, because is it any different than sitting on a Team, Zoom, Google Meet call?
yeah,
Is it
exactly.
any different from, engaging with my colleagues across the desk? Probably not, right? So I'm quite excited about that part of it, right? And how to try and develop some of those use cases as well.
See where that goes. Let's see where that
Yes.
goes. All right. Well, no, thank you for this. It's been super insightful, and I'm hoping the listeners will sort of get some good value from that. I'm sure they will. Can we share those reports out? I'm not sure, but can you
Yes.
share the?
Mhm.
I know the World
I'll
Economic
share the
Forum one. That'd be
links. Yep.
great. Maybe I'll even go out on a whim and say the marketing team will put it up on the screen. They did it last time. They put something
Okay.
flashy up and maybe
Hmm.
some links with these reports, and we can post them out because I'm sure the listeners will want to have a look through those. But yeah, thanks so much for today. It's been superb, and yeah, this has been Enablement Uncanned. Speak to you all soon.